The dining room at Harcourt Hall held 16 people, and enough candlelight to make ivory silk glow like something sacred. And Cecilia Langford sat 4 places down from her sister and watched the man she had never been introduced to raise his glass. Sebastian Hale, Duke of Somerford, had been in this house for 4 months. He had eaten at this table a dozen times. He had smiled at Georgiana across the crystal and the silver and the flowers. And Cecilia had watched every one of those smiles and said nothing, because saying nothing was what she did, and she had become very good at it. The room expected a toast. The engagement was 3 weeks old, the invitations were printed, and the dinner was meant to be a celebration. Cecilia's hands were steady in her lap. Her gown was dark blue wool, while her sister wore ivory silk, and at Georgiana's throat their mother's sapphires caught the light. Sapphires that Cecilia had given her 2 years ago, because she had said they suited her better, and meant it, and also could not bear to wear them. Sebastian lifted his glass. He was looking at Georgiana. Then, with no warning that Cecilia could identify afterward, he turned and looked directly at her. "I should tell you," he said. "I am in love with your sister." The table smiled. Somewhere to her left, a woman laughed softly at the sweetness of it. Cecilia's knife paused against the fish. She set it down. Her hand moved to the napkin in her lap and gripped it beneath the tablecloth. And no one saw her knuckles go white because she had spent 5 years learning to keep her hands below the table when something broke inside her. "Oh," she said, softly. "The way you close a door you know will never open again." "She didn't tell you." Sebastian's smile faltered. "Tell me what?" Cecilia looked across the table at Georgiana. Georgiana's face, radiant, perfect, the face that had launched this entire catastrophe, was frozen. Her lips parted. No sound came. Cecilia turned back to Sebastian. She could feel every person at the table in her peripheral vision, the slight lean of attention, the shift of a chair. She lifted her glass. "Nothing," she said. "Forgive me. I misspoke." She let a small, composed smile settle over her features. She had practiced this particular expression so many times it no longer required effort. "To your happiness, both of you." She drank. The table resumed. The conversation found its footing again, and within 2 minutes the moment had been absorbed and forgotten by everyone except the 2 people it had marked. Sebastian did not look at Georgiana for the remainder of the first course. He looked at Cecilia's hand on the glass. Steady, practiced, the hand of a woman who had been drinking toasts to other people's happiness for 26 years. And something registered in him that had no name yet, but that he could not dismiss. Georgiana excused herself before dessert. "A headache," she said. She pressed Sebastian's hand as she passed his chair and did not look at her sister. Cecilia finished her wine. She thanked the cook, spoke briefly with the vicar about the Harrington charity subscription, and when the guests moved to the drawing room, she stepped instead into the corridor, because she needed 30 seconds in the dark to put herself back together. And 30 seconds was all she had ever allowed herself. She did not get 30 seconds. "Lady Cecilia." She stopped. Sebastian was behind her, close enough that she could hear the slight tension in his voice, not anger yet, but the controlled quality of a man who has noticed a discrepancy and cannot leave it alone. She turned. The corridor was lit by a single wall sconce, and the candlelight caught the red rim of her eyes before she could arrange her expression. "What didn't she tell me?" he asked. "It was nothing," Cecilia said. "A family joke, poorly timed. I am sorry for the disruption." He studied her face for a long moment. She met his gaze with the full force of 26 years of practice. "You are a poor liar, Lady Cecilia," he said. Something shifted in her then. Not softness, but the particular sharpness that surfaces in a person who has been underestimated once too often. "I am an excellent liar, Your Grace," she said. "You simply looked too closely this time." She turned and walked back toward the drawing room before he could answer, and she did not look back, and her steps were even and unhurried, and she did not let them become anything else until she was through the door. 6 months before the dinner, Lord Harcourt had been alive. He had met Sebastian's father at a hunting lodge in the north. Two men of similar temperament, scholarly and quiet, who had found in each other the rare pleasure of conversation that required no performance. Over 3 evenings and a great deal of port, they had arrived at an agreement. Informal, unwritten, except in a letter Lord Harcourt sent afterward. "My eldest daughter, Cecilia, will suit your boy." He had described her with the specificity of a man who paid attention. Her management of the estate accounts, her care for the tenants, and the music, always the music. "She plays with a feeling I have not heard in 30 years. Your son will know what I mean when he hears her." Lord Harcourt had died 8 months after writing that letter, before the agreement could be formalized. Sebastian's father had died the following year. The letter had gone into a locked drawer at Somerford, and the agreement had gone with it, unspoken, into the silence that follows men who die before they finish what they started. Cecilia had known about the agreement since she was 17. Her father had told her directly in the library, one October afternoon with a fire going and the estate ledgers open on the desk between them. He had described Lord Somerford's son in simple terms, young, steady, worth knowing, and told her that when the time came, there would be a formal letter. She had nodded and returned to the accounts, and filed it in the part of her mind reserved for things she could not control, and therefore did not spend energy anticipating. Then her mother had died, and the estate had needed managing. And 2 seasons had passed in which Cecilia had not gone to London because someone had to stay, and the formal letter had not come, and she had stopped thinking about it. Until Georgiana found their father's copy of the letter in the family papers. Cecilia had not known about that part until afterward. Until Georgiana had already intercepted Sebastian's introductory letter, already replied as though she were the elder daughter's closest representative, already begun the correspondence that would bring him to Harcourt Hall expecting to meet a woman named Cecilia, and finding instead a woman named Georgiana, who smiled like sunrise and said, with perfect confidence, "My sister is reserved. She asked me to make introductions." Sebastian had never met either of them. He had no reason to doubt it. Cecilia had been in the corridor the day he arrived. She had watched from the half-open door of the housekeeper's room as Georgiana took his hand in the entrance hall and led him toward the drawing room. And she had understood in that moment precisely what had happened and what it would cost her. And she had closed the door quietly and gone back to the quarterly accounts because they would not do themselves. That evening, Georgiana had come to her room. "I know what you are going to say," Georgiana had begun. "Do you?" Cecilia had replied. "He was promised to you through a letter Father wrote before he died. A letter that was never formalized. A letter that nobody knew about except Father and Lord Somerford, and Lord Somerford is also dead." Georgiana had stood very straight, her chin lifted. "Cecilia, he is a duke. You are going to let this pass in silence the way you let everything pass in silence. I simply acted before the silence became permanent." Cecilia had looked at her sister for a long time. Georgiana was 19. motherless, standing in the lamplight with their mother's particular quality of conviction, the certainty of a person who has never been told that what she wants does not automatically belong to her. Their mother's voice had been in Cecilia's ear. Take care of your sister. She is not as strong as you. All right, Cecilia had said. All right, Georgiana had repeated, as though she hadn't been certain it would be that easy. You won't say anything? I won't say anything. She had kept that promise for 4 months. She had managed Sebastian's correspondence when Georgiana was indisposed. She had arranged the rooms he slept in, ensured the fires were laid, and the library was stocked with the periodicals his steward had mentioned he preferred. She had vacated the pianoforte bench whenever guests arrived, because Georgiana performed in company and Cecilia played in private, and she had long since stopped expecting those two facts to be treated as equally valid. She had watched Sebastian hail for 4 months and said nothing. And she had told herself this was love. Love for her sister. Love for her mother's memory. Love expressed in the only language she had ever been taught. Silence and sacrifice and the careful management of her own disappearance. The dinner had been the first crack in the architecture. Sebastian could not sleep. He lay in the guest room at Harcourt Hall and went back through 4 months of interaction with methodical, uncomfortable attention. The correspondence he had received, always prompt, always precise, always managing some practical detail he had not thought to ask about. The rooms that were exactly right in ways Georgiana would not have known to make them. The pianoforte bench, vacated every time guests arrived, as though whoever sat there had received an instruction about her own invisibility. He thought about Cecilia's face in the corridor, the red-rimmed eyes, the composure that had settled over them like a shutter being drawn. I am an excellent liar. You simply looked too closely this time. He sat up. He went to the writing desk. He wrote a letter to his steward at Summerford, instructing him to locate his father's correspondence archive and leave it undisturbed until Sebastian's arrival. He sealed it before he could reconsider, and he placed it on the tray for the Morning Post. And he stood at the window and looked at the grounds of Harcourt Hall in the dark, and tried to count how many times he had been in the same room as Cecilia Langford, without once asking her a direct question. The wedding was in 3 weeks. He found Mr. Thornbury, the family music master, the following afternoon on the pretext of asking about the sisters' musical education. Thornbury was a small, precise man of 60, with the particular patience of someone who has spent 40 years teaching people to hear what they are not listening to. He received Sebastian in the schoolroom, where a pianoforte stood against the wall with a leather folio of manuscript paper on the stand. I taught Lady Cecilia for 8 years, Thornbury said, when Sebastian had framed his inquiry carefully enough. Lady Georgiana for 3. They are not the same musician. In what sense? Sebastian asked. In every sense that matters to a musician. Thornbury was not unkind, but he was not diplomatic either. Lady Georgiana plays accurately. She has good memory and a pleasant touch. Lady Cecilia plays as though the instrument is an extension of her thinking. Your father knew this. Lord Harcourt asked me specifically to write to Lord Summerford about Lady Cecilia's playing. I did so, approximately 6 years ago. Sebastian was very still. You wrote to my father. I did. Lord Harcourt gave me the direction. I described her playing in some detail, the Schubert Lied she had been working on, the compositions she had begun writing herself. Lord Summerford wrote back to thank me. Thornbury paused. I assumed the matter had proceeded in the usual way. I see now that it did not. Sebastian asked one more question before he left. Why does Lady Cecilia never play when guests are present? Thornbury was quiet for a moment. He looked at the leather folio on the pianoforte stand. The late Marchioness, he said finally, believed that Lady Georgiana needed the audience more than her sister did. She communicated this to Lady Cecilia when Lady Cecilia was perhaps 20. I was present. Lady Cecilia said, "Yes, Mamma," and closed the lid of the instrument, and she has not opened it in company since. He paused again. She opens it when the house is quiet. I have heard her from the corridor many times. She is rather extraordinary. Sebastian walked back through the hall with the information settling into him like cold water finding the level. The modest dress, the estate accounts, the vacated bench, the managed correspondence. Not shyness, not preference. A system built piece by piece in which one woman's presence had been methodically reduced to make room for another's. That evening, he went to the library to think and found it already occupied. Cecilia was at the far end of the long table, copying tenant accounts by the light of a single candle that had burned so low it was guttering. She did not look up when he entered. She was deep in a column of figures, her pen moving with the unhurried efficiency of a person who has done this particular task several hundred times. Sebastian crossed to the mantel without speaking. He took a fresh candle from the holder there, bent to light it from her dying one while it still had a flame to give, and placed it beside her papers. She looked up then. Their eyes met across the small new light. "You should sleep," he said. "The accounts need finishing," she said. "They will wait until tomorrow." They never wait. That is the nature of accounts. Each day's delay creates the next day's correction. She looked back at the page. "But thank you for the candle." He pulled a chair to the opposite side of the table, sat down, and drew the estate ledger toward him. The section she had not yet reached. She watched him for a moment without speaking, her pen suspended. "You do not need to do that," she said. "I know." He opened the ledger to the drainage column and began to read. They worked in parallel for the better part of an hour, saying nothing. The house settled around them, the particular silence of a large building at night, timbers cooling, fires dying down in empty rooms. When Cecilia set down her pen and gathered her papers, she noticed that Sebastian had made the 2 corrections in the margin of the ledger in his own hand, small and precise. She checked them against her figures. Both were accurate. She said nothing about it, but she did not close the ledger before she left. The following afternoon they walked the grounds, and it was the first time in 4 months they had been outside together without Georgiana between them, like a lamp that drew all available attention to itself. Cecilia knew the estate the way she knew her own hands, by use, by repetition, by the accumulated knowledge of someone who had walked every field and spoken with every tenant, and understood which hedge had been let go 2 seasons running, and which drainage ditch needed clearing before the autumn rains. She talked about the lower field without thinking, pointing to the problem areas with the short-nailed, ink-stained hands of a woman who worked. And Sebastian walked beside her and listened. And she had been talking for perhaps 10 minutes before she noticed he was watching her hands rather than the hedgerow she was indicating. She stopped mid-sentence. "You are not listening," she said. "I am watching your hands," he said. "My hands are unremarkable." He reached out and took her right hand before she could withdraw it. He turned it palm up, and she was too surprised to pull back, and he ran his thumb slowly across the hardened skin at the tips of her fingers. The calluses that years of pianoforte had built into the whorls of her fingerprints. "These are not a duchess's hands," he said. "No," she said. Her voice was level. "These are a musician's." He did not release her hand immediately. He held it with his thumb resting against her wrist, where the pulse ran close to the surface, and she felt him register it. The small, involuntary quickening that she could not control. Then he released her, and she folded both hands behind her back, and they stood for a moment looking at the lower field. "The drainage," she said, "will need to be addressed before November." "Yes," he said, "I imagine it will." He could not sleep again that night. But this time, it was not the dinner that kept him awake. It was music. It came through the dark house as though the walls were not entirely solid. A thread of sound, barely audible from the guest corridor, that his sleeping mind processed as something familiar before he was fully conscious. He followed it through 2 hallways and down a back stair and found the music room with its door slightly ajar, candlelight falling across the floor in a narrow strip. He stopped in the doorway. Cecilia was at the pianoforte with her back to him, and she was playing the Schubert Lied. Not a version of it, not a piece that resembled it. The exact Lied his father had described in the letter Sebastian had read once, years ago, and had never forgotten because his father had written with such uncharacteristic feeling. She plays with a quality I have not heard in 30 years. When you hear her, you will understand why your grandfather chose your grandmother and not the other one. Cecilia played it as though the instrument were breathing through her. The phrase his father had used, which Sebastian had thought was sentiment, and now understood was plain description. She did not hear him enter. He stood in the doorway for 3 full minutes and did not move, and the music moved through the room like something that had been waiting in the walls. She stopped. The last note faded. "Where did you learn that piece?" Sebastian asked. She turned on the bench. She was not startled. Or, if she was, she had absorbed it before turning. She looked at him in the candlelight with the expression of a woman deciding how much truth to offer. "My father taught it to me," she said. He said it reminded him of a promise he once made to a friend. The word promise did something to Sebastian's face that he could not entirely prevent. "What kind of promise?" he asked. He never specified. She looked at her hands on the keys. "He played it for me every year on my birthday until I could play it myself. Then I played it for him. That was our arrangement." Sebastian said, "Your father described your playing in a letter once, to someone he trusted." She looked up at him. Her expression did not change, but something behind it shifted. A door opening a fraction, then held. "Did he?" she said, not a question. He used those exact words. A feeling I have not heard in 30 years. Cecilia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good night, Your Grace." He said good night and left, and he rode to Summerford the following morning before breakfast. His father's study had not been touched since the funeral. Sebastian went through the desk first, then the shelves, and finally the locked lower drawer for which he found the key in the pocket of his father's winter coat, still hanging on the back of the door as though waiting to be needed. Inside the drawer was a bundle of letters tied with household string. The 4th letter in the bundle was in a hand Sebastian did not recognize at first, a careful, unhurried script that he eventually placed as belonging to a man who had been dead for 4 years. Lord Harcourt. The date was 6 years ago. My eldest daughter, Cecilia, will suit your boy. She is 20 and already manages the household accounts with a precision that shames my steward. She plays with a feeling I have not heard in 30 years. Thornbury has written to you separately on this point. She is not a drawing-room ornament, and I will not pretend otherwise. She is the kind of woman who keeps the lights on when everyone else has gone to bed. Your son will know what I mean, or he will not. And if he does not, then the match is not right. Sebastian read it to the end. He set it on the desk. He sat in his father's chair without moving for a long time. He had been in Harcourt Hall for 4 months. Cecilia had managed his correspondence. She had arranged the rooms he slept in. She had walked beside him in the lower field and named every drainage problem by location and cause. She had been at the pianoforte in the music room, playing the exact piece his father had described. And he had spent 4 months looking at Georgiana's face, and not once, had he turned his head far enough to see the woman standing just outside the candlelight. The anger arrived then. Not at Georgiana, not yet. At himself. I have been in that house for 4 months. She kept the lights on, and I did not look at her once. He folded the letter and put it in his coat pocket and rode back to Harcourt Hall. He found Georgiana in the morning room before Cecilia was downstairs. She was at the window with her embroidery, composed and lovely in pale yellow. And she looked up when he entered with the smile she had perfected over 4 months of his attention. He closed the door. Closed. "Did you intercept my letter?" he asked. The smile held for 8 seconds. He counted them. Then Georgiana set down her embroidery. "She would have been miserable," she said. "You must understand that. Cecilia hates London. She hates balls. She hates assemblies. She hates everything that a duke's household requires. She would have wilted within a year and made you miserable too, and you would have blamed her for it." "That," Sebastian said, "is not your decision to make. It was my decision because nobody else was making one." Georgiana's voice had risen slightly. Not to anger, but to the particular pitch of a person who has rehearsed this argument and believes it. Father was dead. Mama was dead. Cecilia was going to let another season pass without speaking and simply disappear the way she always does, because she thinks disappearing is the same as being good. And I wanted to live. She looked at him directly. I wanted to live, and she was going to let everything pass her by. And I am not sorry for wanting that. I am sorry for how I did it. "Are you?" Sebastian said. "I am sorry that it has caused this difficulty, yes." She held his gaze. "But I am not sorry that I tried." Sebastian looked at her for a long moment, at the genuine conviction in her face, the 19-year-old certainty that wanting something fiercely enough makes it yours by right. And he felt something that was not quite anger and not quite pity, and was perhaps the recognition of a person who has been given too much permission for too long. "The engagement," he said, "is not resolved. But it is not what it was this morning." He left her there, and she did not call him back. And within 2 days, the damage had been done. Georgiana told Lady Brathwaite, the county's most efficient distributor of social information, that Cecilia was unwell. "Jealous delusions," she said, with a small, sad shake of her head. The Duke had been kind to her, as he was kind to everyone, and Cecilia had apparently mistaken kindness for something else. It was very sad. She hoped her sister would recover herself. The rumor reached Cecilia on a Thursday morning in the form of a withdrawn invitation to the Harrington supper, delivered with a brief note of regret and the particular stiffness of a hostess who has been told something she cannot unknow. Cecilia read the note twice. She folded it. She placed it on the hall table beside the post tray, and she went to the music room. And she sat on the pianoforte bench with her hands in her lap and looked at the keys without playing. She was still sitting there when Sebastian entered. He crossed the room without speaking and sat beside her on the bench. Their shoulders touched. Neither of them moved away. "She told Lady Brathwaite I am delusional," Cecilia said. "I know," he said. "She is afraid." Cecilia's voice was even. "She does not know how to be the person she actually is, so she becomes whoever the room requires. When the room requires her to protect herself, she becomes someone who says cruel things." "You are defending her," he said. "I am explaining her. It is not the same thing." She looked at the keys. "I have explained Georgiana to people my entire life. I am very good at it." Sebastian placed his hand over both of hers where they rested in her lap. He held them. Not tightly. Just the warm, steady weight of a hand that had decided to stay. She sat with it for a moment. And then she leaned 1 degree, barely perceptible, into his shoulder. And they sat in the dark music room while the house moved quietly around them, touching at the shoulder and the hands, and neither of them spoke again. The next morning, Cecilia went to Georgiana's sitting room. She did not knock loudly. She opened the door and closed it behind her and stood in the center of the room. And Georgiana looked up from the window seat where she had been sitting with a book she was not reading. "You told Lady Brathwaite I was having jealous delusions," Cecilia said. Georgiana did not deny it. "You withdrew the Harrington invitation," Cecilia continued. "You have damaged my reputation in this county, which is the only place I live, to protect an engagement that was built on a letter you stole from me." "You promised, Mama," Georgiana said. Her voice was thin. "Mama asked me to take care of you," Cecilia said. "She did not ask me to erase myself. I have spent 5 years confusing those two things, and I am telling you now, clearly, that I will not confuse them any longer." Georgiana stood. "You promised." "I kept that promise until it began to cost me things I cannot replace." Cecilia was not shouting. She had never shouted at Georgiana in her life. And she did not shout now because she did not need to. The steadiness in her voice was more frightening than volume. "My father wrote a letter, Georgie. He described me to Lord Summerford by name. He said I would suit his son. That was his decision to make, and he made it. And you found that letter and decided your judgment was better than a dead man's. And you have been lying to a duke for 4 months with me as your accomplice." "You were going to let it pass," Georgiana said. "You always let everything pass." "Yes," Cecilia said. "I did. And I am telling you that I am done with that particular habit." She looked at her sister, at the beautiful, frightened face, the chin lifted in the exact angle their mother had used when she was trying not to show she was losing an argument. "I love you. I have loved you every day of your life, including the days when you made it very difficult. But I will not disappear for you. Not anymore." Georgiana sat back down. The resistance left her in stages. The lifted chin, the straight shoulders, the composure, all of it going, until she was simply a 19-year-old girl sitting in a window seat with her hands in her lap. "He was the one thing I wanted," she said quietly. "The one thing that was going to be mine." "I know," Cecilia said. And she did know. She had always known. That was what made it so difficult. She left Georgiana there and walked back through the corridor and down the stairs and out onto the garden terrace, where the first light was just beginning at the edge of the sky. And she stood at the stone balustrade and looked at the grounds of Harcourt Hall and made the decision that had been building for 5 years. She was done being quiet. He found her there at dawn. She heard his footsteps on the stone, the particular rhythm of a man who has been awake all night and has decided to stop pretending otherwise. And she turned before he reached her. Sebastian placed a folded letter on the balustrade between them. She looked at it then at him. "Read it," he said. She unfolded it. Her father's handwriting. She knew it before she read a word, knew the particular angle of his pen and the way he formed his capital letters. And for a moment she could not read, because she was looking at proof that he had thought of her, had described her to a stranger with care and specificity, had believed she was worth the trouble of a letter. "My eldest daughter, Cecilia, will suit your boy." She read it to the end. She folded it along its original creases. "How long have you known?" Sebastian asked. "Since Georgiana intercepted your first letter," she said. 4 months. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at the grounds. The light was coming up over the east hedge, pale and steady. The particular quality of early morning that had always belonged to her. The 1 hour before the house woke and required her. "Because my mother asked me to take care of Georgiana," she said. "And Georgiana wanted you. And I decided that taking care of her meant letting her have what she wanted, even when what she wanted was mine." She paused. "I have been making that decision for 5 years about a great many things. The pianoforte, the London seasons, the sapphires, your letters." She turned to look at him directly. "I told myself it was devotion. It was not devotion. It was the slow, methodical disappearance of a woman who was taught that her sister's happiness mattered more than her own, and who believed it because a dying woman told her so, and she was 21 and did not yet know the difference." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. "Your mother asked you to disappear." "My mother asked me to love my sister," Cecilia said. "I confused the two. I have been confusing them for a very long time." She met his eyes. "And now I am standing on a terrace at dawn, telling a man who was promised to me that my sister lied, and I let her. I am not disappearing. I am here. Whether you choose me or Georgiana or neither of us, I am here. And I am done being quiet." Something in Sebastian's face shifted. Not the anger she had been half expecting, but something slower and more costly. The expression of a man confronting a failure he cannot assign to anyone else. "I was in that house for 4 months, he said. "You arranged every room I slept in. You managed the correspondence when Georgiana was indisposed. You walked me through the lower field and named every problem by location and cause. You played the piece my father described in that letter, the exact piece with the exact quality he named. And I heard it and still needed a drawer full of documents to understand what I was looking at." He stopped. "I looked at your sister and stopped looking at anything else. That is not Georgiana's fault. It is mine." Cecilia looked at him. "I do not want the woman who lights up the room," he said. "I want the woman who keeps the lights on." He picked up the letter from the balustrade. He folded it once, carefully, and placed it in her hand. He closed her fingers around it. "This belongs to you. It always did." She stood with it for a moment. Then Sebastian took her wrist. The wrist where he had felt her pulse in the garden, the one she had folded behind her back afterward, and drew her gently toward him. And she closed the last distance herself. The kiss was slow. It had been built over 4 months of proximity and restraint, and it carried all of that weight without being heavy. It was the relief of a door finally opened, and it lasted until the light had fully changed and the garden below them was gold. When they parted, Cecilia said, "I was playing the night you arrived. You were in the drawing room with Georgiana." "I know," he said. "I will not make that mistake again." "No," she said, "you will not. Because from now on, I play when I choose, not when the house is empty." 1 hour later, she went to Georgiana's bedroom alone. Georgiana was packing. She had 2 trunks open on the floor and her maid moving between the wardrobe and the cases. And she looked up when Cecilia entered with the expression of a person who has been expecting a particular conversation and has decided to be the one who controls its terms. "You told him," Georgiana said. "I told him because I love myself." Cecilia said, "I should have told him 4 months ago because I love you." "How is destroying my engagement loving me?" Cecilia sat on the edge of the bed. She waited until Georgiana had dismissed the maid and the door was closed. "Because you built it on a lie," Cecilia said. "And a marriage built on a lie would have destroyed you." "Not next year. You could manage next year. In 10 years, Georgie." When he heard me play and asked why you never played like that, and the question never stopped. When every room I entered reminded him of what he thought he was getting and what he actually received. That is not a marriage. That is a slow trial with no verdict. Georgiana sat down on the bed beside her. The fight had been gone since the sitting room. There was nothing left of it now, only the girl underneath, who was 19 and frightened, and had made a very large mistake. "I wanted it so badly," she said. "I know," Cecilia said. "But wanting something does not make it yours." Georgiana was quiet for a moment. "What if I am not enough without the pretending? Without being the charming one, the beautiful one, the one who makes people forget to look at anyone else?" Cecilia took her sister's hand. "You are 19, she said. "You have time to find out." They sat on the edge of the bed together, the betrayer and the betrayed. Still sisters, still family, still the two people who had grown up in this house with the same mother and the same father, and arrived at this morning by entirely different routes. Cecilia held her sister's hand until Georgiana's breathing steadied. Sebastian ended the engagement formally that afternoon. Georgiana departed for Bath the following morning. The house was very quiet. 3 months passed. Sebastian called at Harcourt Hall twice a week, always at the same hour, always announced by the crunch of wheels on gravel that Cecilia had come to recognize without needing to look up from whatever she was doing. He sat on the bench beside her in the music room. He read while she played, or he watched the fire, or he turned pages when she asked him to. He had learned which pieces required concentration and which ones she played while thinking about something else entirely, and he had stopped asking her to explain the difference because he had begun to hear it himself. On a Tuesday evening in October, she was playing when he arrived. Not Schubert, her own composition, the one she had been working on for 2 years, the one that had lived in the leather folio on the pianoforte stand with no ending. He sat in the chair by the window and listened. She reached a passage he had not heard before, new bars, something that had not existed last week, a resolution that was not triumphant and not tragic, but something more specific than either. The sound of a door opening after a long time closed. She stopped. She sat with her hands resting on the keys for a moment. "I finished it," she said. "Last Tuesday. I played the ending 3 times to make certain it was right. Then I played it a 4th time because I wanted to." Sebastian crossed the room and sat beside her on the bench. "When did you stop playing because you had to and start playing because you wanted to?" he asked. "About 6 weeks ago," she said. "I was composing late, out of habit, because that was when the house used to be quiet enough. And I realized the house was empty and I was playing anyway. Not because no one could hear me, because the music was mine and I wanted to hear it." He looked at her. "Play it again." "You have just heard it." "I want to hear the ending again, the part that took 3 months." She played. He turned the pages. At the final passage, when her right hand reached for the manuscript to turn the last page herself, his hand was already there. And for a moment, their hands were on the paper together. her ink-stained fingers and his, the manuscript between them, the ending beneath both their hands. She played it through to the last note. The room held the silence after it for a moment, the way a good room does. Later that autumn, she sat at the head of the dining room table for the first time. Her father's chair. She had walked past it for 5 years and sat 2 places to the left, because it had seemed presumptuous, because no one had suggested she should, because she had become so accustomed to occupying less space than she was entitled to, that the habit had outlasted any conscious decision. Tonight, she had simply sat down in it, and Sebastian had taken the chair to her right without comment, as though it had always been this way. 8 guests. Mr. Thornbury, the vicar, 3 neighbors, and 2 of Sebastian's friends from Somerford who had come to call and been invited to stay for dinner. The table was warm with candlelight and conversation, and Cecilia was at the head of it, managing the evening with the same quiet competence she had applied to every other aspect of Harcourt Hall for 5 years, except that tonight she was not invisible. A letter arrived during dessert. From Bath. Cecilia's name on the outside in Georgiana's handwriting, the particular looping script their writing master had taught them both, which Georgiana had kept and Cecilia had abandoned in favor of something more legible. She read it without leaving the table. The room continued around her. Conversation, the clink of glasses, Mr. Thornbury telling the vicar something about a musical score he had found in the schoolroom. She folded the letter and placed it beside her plate. She says she is sorry, Cecilia told Sebastian quietly. She has been walking every morning. She is learning the pianoforte properly, not for performance, she says, just to understand it. She paused. She says she does not expect forgiveness, but she hopes for time. What will you do? Sebastian asked. Write back tomorrow. I will tell her I love her, and that time is what I have always given her. She looked at the letter for a moment. She is 19. She made a very large mistake. I do not think she is finished becoming who she is going to be. She looked up from the letter and found Sebastian watching her from the chair to her right. The same candlelight, the same room, the same table where 4 months ago he had said, "I am in love with your sister." And she had gripped her napkin beneath the tablecloth and drunk a toast to someone else's happiness. He was not looking at the door through which an absent sister might arrive. He was not looking at the empty chair 2 places to the left. He was looking at her, with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who has learned the difference between glancing and seeing, and is no longer willing to confuse them. "You are staring," she said. "I am seeing," he said. "There is a difference. I am learning it." "You are slow," she said. "I am," he agreed, "but the music helps." She looked at him across the table, and the candles were steady, and the room was warm, and the chair at the head of the table held the woman who was always supposed to sit in it. She knew it now. He knew it now. The house, which had kept her secrets for 26 years, knew it too.